bar we have here at Figma is very hard. So we always joke about how the 90% is easy, the 10% is the last 10%. It's like, it feels like dog years.
What was your first iteration look like?
This was going to be the first overall framing for any AI 0 to 1-esque tool within Figma. Can we take a step back and think about what an AI system could look like on FigJam? What are our principles? What are our use cases? This whole crit ended up being the first iteration of AI templates. And it's not just for AI templates, but it's like AI entry points. What is our overall prompting system? How do you do the AI icons, right? What do these things look like? I basically did a very large, broad stroke stab at everything.
Howdy and welcome to Deep Dive. This is your host, Jay. Today we have Natasha from Figma. Natasha, I'm so excited because this is an AI design project. And right now it's just me, but I feel like if I just went to the balcony and shouted that this is an AI design project for FigJam, I probably would have some people come up just to view this. So super stoked to look inside it.
No pressure, no pressure. Especially seeing my vulnerable dear Figma files. I'm like, it's not even in presentation format.
So what was this AI feature here? If you can give like a high level overview.
Yeah, sure. Let me zoom in into here. And maybe some folks have seen this before, but so dovetailing off of Jambot's launch. So Jambot launched last year in July, and Osheng, who is a dear designer partner, and I helped work on that overall push, and ended up being like one of Figma's first AI launches into like, it was a first try into the AI space, essentially. Just a lot of collaboration there. So after seeing sort of the momentum behind that, we started to think about what are some other AI portfolio of tools that could be really helpful for the whiteboarding, facilitation, and collaboration workflow on FigJam specifically. So we thought of like a bunch. And what we ended up prioritizing is a series of 1, features to help people generate content. So anything that's 0 to 1. And then 2, features that help people take away the tedious tasks of facilitating a meeting. And that started with summarization and clustering, which another design team member helped push through in design. So I oversaw all of the bundle of those AI features, but specifically drove the generate feature, which is generating templates. And you'll see that this is probably the version that we ended up launching with. It has gone through so much iteration since it's launched. So what you might see in prod right now that people are using doesn't map one-to-one to this. But I think for the sake of this conversation, we can really dive into the overall process of why templates, how did this get built, what was the starting point, what was the whole collaboration process look like, and the overall just design decisions, right? So that's a quick overview. And to TLDR, what generating templates is we know that starting from a blank canvas is infinitely challenging, especially for a tool like FigJam. I think when you use something like Figma, people know Figma is a design tool. You're there to design. And because it's so commonly used in a lot of tech companies, people know it's for product design or UI design or prototyping, right? FigJam, we don't have that liberty. People see this and they're like, what the hell do I do? I know Figma. Is this another design tool? Is FigJam another design tool? It doesn't seem like it is. So we then have a step before problem, which is just, okay, we need to tell people what to use this tool for. What are the use cases, right? Templates is obviously probably the biggest lever to help people solve for that. But unfortunately, making templates is also really hard because that means you have to know the tools. How do you create a section? How do you add stickies? All that stuff. So we thought that literally being able to just have someone describe something is probably the best way to do things, and we'll make it for you. So you don't have to worry about the pixel pushing of your board. We know facilitators really care about that, right? They want to feel like a designer made their board. So we want to take all of that off their plate so they can just focus on an agenda or a content. So that's what this is essentially.
So this is the final design that got shipped, but I'm curious to see all the way back, what was your first iteration look like?
And just as I was saying this, I was giving Jay context that this project took so many explorations that we have 2 Figma files for this because they ended up being so big. So this Figma file is when decisions were made and alignment has happened, and we were just going through some more refinement and polished details, versus this is like the big explorative, as you can see, it was called prompt to board. Then this is our exploration file, and I ended up having to create a new page just to be like, engineers, go to this one if you want like the final specs. But essentially, I will actually show you one of the very first crits I facilitated for AI templates, which is this file. So a lot here, but at this point, we knew we wanted to do something with templates. This was going to be the first overall framing for any AI 0 to 1-esque tool within Figma. So it almost seemed like we needed to be very specific with even some early principles of what we really cared about as a team. And we also didn't have an AI system at this point, right? I think you see from the recent config launch, we had like actions, and actions is the eventual home for all your like AI tools. So there's one discovery surface to leverage and kind of to build habits around. At this point, we had nothing. So we're thinking, okay, before we even solve for this one feature, can we take a step back and think about what an AI system could look like on FigJam? What are our principles? What are our use cases? This whole crit ended up being the first iteration of AI templates. And it's not just for AI templates, but it's like AI entry points. What is our overall prompting system? What is like a different entry point when you're trying to see variations or generating alternatives, right? Instead of just one template. So these are just all different types of approaches for entry points. And then also just what's the contextual prompting system? You know, when you select a specific node and you want to modify certain attributes to that node, what are the different states? How do you do the AI icons, right? What do these things look like? I basically did a very large, broad strokes stab at everything. And then basically focused a little bit more on my future crits on templates specifically. To answer your question, the very first iteration of AI templates looked something like this. It was literally just outlining, really leaning with an outline, saying instead of writing a prompt, just give us a short outline for what you're trying to do. You want to draft an agenda, you want to outline goals, you want to describe activities. Maybe you can paste an agenda you created on Google Doc or paper elsewhere into here, and FigJam will essentially do the rest. And at this point, we were like leaning on drop downs as a way to convey use cases. That ended up being a whole slew of exploration because we feel like drop downs actually end up hiding use cases. So a lot of stuff. This ended up being one too, where maybe you could write a prompt or even like import other pieces of context. That was an idea that we had where I think a big part of using AI and finding value in AI is being able to meet AI where you already are. So if you're already drafting something elsewhere, how do we just drive that in and help you get started via another way? So yeah.
Some of iteration, the font here, like in the second one, you can see that the font, like the weight is much stronger on the right side. So it's much easier to read. But in the left one, because you are expecting the user to type, it's very light. So did you think about that font weight as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think especially when you think about at this point, it depends on where you are in how connected you are with like the evolution of AI design tools or AI tools in general, right? Prompting is a very challenging thing for most folks, especially when we think about a tool like FigJam. Naturally, people are like non-designers. They're like user researchers, they're data scientists, they're engineers, they're like PMs. There's people who maybe are less familiar with AI design tools. So prompting became something we considered and something we have to think about solving for to make it easier. So placeholder text is one way we can solve for that, right? You'll see this is like a very common pattern in so many AI tools now. We're like down to the how you create and design placeholders. They need to be relevant in helping people understand the syntax of an overall prompt. So things like this, where we're trying to help people maybe drafting an agenda is a more approachable way to get people to understand what to do here. But it's not salient. It feels pretty subdued. And it's a lot. This is also there's like a whole instruction, which is not good. we were definitely thinking about considering, taking that into consideration. Like this is just different explorations. This is like an example of a drop down where you can like default choose to do anything, or you can maybe specify what type of use case you want. And like these 4 are core to FigJam. This is what like a lot of people use FigJam for now. We thought of something like this where use cases weren't hidden behind a drop down, and we were like thinking of adding icons. Maybe at this point, again, you can prompt here. Maybe you can specify how many participants, because the number of participants indicates how big your board is, especially for something like a brainstorm. Maybe a palette, maybe adjusting your tone here immediately. And then you can was a weird, crazy idea that I personally had, was like maybe remix a potential thought or agenda with one of your favorite existing templates, because we had a lot of first-party templates on FigJam. So it was all about, if you already have one you like, we can use that and we can just like content fill, right, with whatever you're trying to like accomplish in that brainstorm. So lots and lots of exploration there. I think at this point, even for plans, we were like, we can add artifacts for you. We can add like a Gantt chart in, a calendar, an alignment scale.
I see you're bringing back even the icons
Yeah.
now. Like in the early iterations, there was no icons. Now I see the icons to, instead of the drop down, you pivoted to the icons.
Yep. It was again really trying to lean into very visual aspects of FigJam. This is even a crazy exploration I had where this does not have any like business case value or user value, but we're like, ooh, maybe you could like remix boards where you can select like a specific FigJam board and a specific template, and we squish it and mash it up for you and give you an artifact that is like helpful. Because you could like quality the one thing, let's say one of this is an old meeting that Jenny, who my manager, she like runs really fantastic meetings. Maybe it's a meeting that she ran really well and you want to lean into some of her best practices or her ways of setting up a meeting. But then you also really like this strategic planning framing, right? Like maybe there's a way we could remix that. But obviously this is just like something off the back of my brain where I'm like, ooh, maybe. Eventually what we ended up presenting to execs is actually something that looks like this. I wonder if this is the video. Yeah. I think this was also made in origami. So as you can see, it's like the prompting box up here, fresh new file, what would you like to do? And then the use cases down here. And it's like ad lib style. So you want to create a project retrospective about a specific team in your org. So everything is progressive over time to help you build out your prompt. And then obviously as you're generating, we create that and stream that in for you. And ta-da, you have your board. So this was like probably the first conceptualized prototype. We were like, oh, maybe we should shop this around and see how people are feeling. But as you can see, it's like such a drastic difference from something that looks like this. Even like from where we ended up launching, that looks very different from the prototype I just showed.
So what happened after you shopped it to the execs? Was there like a new set of explorations that you went from that point?
Yes, 100%. So obviously, so much of this was from that initial conversation and ideation with the team. There's not a lot of comments in these files because I had to import them elsewhere, but imagine so many comment bubbles everywhere in that file that probably slows it down even more. The next iteration is like really leaning into content generation a little bit more. There's like a bunch of frameworks I was thinking about here to really set the stage for folks on the team. Because I think one thing I like to do when I'm approaching crit is help people think about the problem the way you're thinking about the problem. This is also like maybe a skill and quality I love about PMs that I work with too. It's a lot of helping people understand the operating model or like the working model for how do you want to solve this problem instead of just like diving into the solution. Let's take a step back and think about how we want to think about the solutions. A lot of this is just setting people up for that.
And what was that operating model you set people up for in this crit?
I think the biggest one is people are going to say, oh, how did you land on AI templates being the first? And my answer to that is it's the first because we care about solving for the blank canvas problem first, but this is not the only thing we're planning on doing. So this was like a general milestone framework I'm using just to make sure that people know, and we're like pacifying people's concerns as to why we're doing this first and not that. And it's like, we're planning on doing everything that you guys want us to, but we're starting with this because this was always good just to help level set expectations. And a big part of this is like how we think about within the ecosystem of helping someone start from scratch. There are two spectrums to that. You can use a template. This is called an in-exportation because you're not really having to do much. You're just clicking add template and you're starting, right? Which means that it's very predefined. And outputs, like the actual artifact you're using, is very constrained, meaning you're at the liberty of how someone else designed that template, right? Energy needs to start very low, but energy actually needed to get it right is going to be pretty high because the minute you are using it, you're having to still change things and contextualize it to what you are trying to do too. As opposed to the complete opposite, the DLT, you'll see this a lot in the box. DLT is what we call the delightful toolbar, which is the FigJam toolbar. So you'll see this acronym in a lot of things. It's delightful because it is delightful. But essentially, this is different because here you'll notice that, again, the energy to start is high because you're having to know how to use very, very primitive level tools, right? But the energy needed to get it right is actually just pretty low because you're customizing it from the get-go for what you need. So we're trying to think of AI templates being this sort of middle ground where you're not going to do much to actually start and you're not going to have to do much to get it right, because we're hoping that we're able to couple the benefit of having it be like an export action so anyone can use it with very bespoke outputs so you're getting exactly what you need. This was a big question people were asking, which is like, how are we consolidating how we're defining templates and creation starting points and all that stuff? So we were really trying to visualize that framework. And I can get into that a lot because this is a very small distillation of so many conversations we've had there. But I think this is also very important too, where these were the general principles I wanted to really establish, where to get this right, to get this to some place that people really want to use, we need to design pretty reliable and discoverable entry points. We need to carve out creation paths that'll actually lead users to good outputs. And then also, very important, make exploration cheap and quick. People need to be able to riff on things very quickly. So this is a good example of like how I'm thinking about the problem and how I'm hoping I can bring people along to think about the problem, which sets the context for all of this, essentially.
Now I want to see the design for this. Yeah.
Like I said here, I think entry points were a big one. So I think in the last mock that I showed you, it was just this super small box. And in this one, the next iteration, we were really trying to think, okay, but what is the home? What is the home for this in FigJam? So you can see that we thought of it maybe being like a separate sub menu within the delightful toolbar. So maybe something you can invoke here and this kind of pops up above. Here's like a quick flow that we were thinking about. Let me see. Another one is like maybe utilizing a new file placeholder. So this one was, what if at every new file, you just have the entry point sort of as an ephemeral layer to the left tucked away where you can describe your board. That was a big one. Here's another one of a different exploration of this version where we're maybe like expanding on the use cases much more clearly. This one was like, what if it was a template sidebar? So you click templates and, maybe this is just your existing templates, but there's an escape hatch to create and describe your own template. So this is really consolidating the system with templates, right? Yeah. And let me also preface that was what I was like trying to explore here. So every single one of my explorations is mapped to like something that is evergreen, like a really evergreen permanent entry point, as opposed to something that's maybe a little bit more organic that feels very inherent to someone's natural workflow. So every single one of these explorations is mapped to a part of this spectrum, essentially.
But wouldn't you want to, by default, go with the solution that maps to a permanent AI entry point? Because then it's always there. Like the last example you showed me had an icon at the top for templates. So I know it's always going to be there. Like I don't have to rely on some organic workflow to discover it.
I think that feels right for if you already currently have a template workflow. To an extent, that is an organic workflow if you know where templates is. So if you open a new file and you know that templates lives up here, you can obviously click it and you'll see an entry point for AI creation there. But people, a lot of them aren't always accessing templates from here. They're accessing templates from the inserts menu. They're accessing templates from community. They're accessing templates in so many different ways, or even they're trying to create their own. And then midway, maybe they need a little bit of help that we could, and that's like an organic workflow, right? Where how do we meet you where you are at that moment? We were trying to think, and the answer oftentimes is not, let's just do one. It's often create a point of view to do a couple and be very opinionated when we want to do one over the other. So that's why I think breadth of explorations was really good in this moment to facilitate that type of conversation, because we're trying to like really nuance the decision making. And yeah, inserts was a big one. We were trying to think of that too. So these are all explorations related to entry points. I think entry points is a very different conversation to what the actual creation experience is like. This is a whole body of other discussions and debates too, where when you actually find where to click to use it, what does that experience look like? Obviously, one of them was like, oh, maybe if you click create your own, we actually pop up like a Command K. This was like before Actions was even born, technically. This was like months before that conversation even happened, where let's say we can adjust Command K in the command menu to house AI and the creation experience. maybe we create a whole separate bespoke modal that's not constrained to the command K menu at all. Or maybe we then also build it within the template sidebar, right? So this is like an example where maybe the create experience is actually like all templates, custom is custom templates, community is community templates, and then we have the create tab where here you're then doing the actual creating of your prompt and all that stuff. Lots of ideas there.
Which was the final, like not final, but which was the direction you were leaning in from this specific exploration towards the end? Out of all these breadth of explorations, was there like one direction you're like, okay, I think from this round, this is the direction we're leaning in to pitch to the execs again?
I think this required a lot of socialization at the time, but my hunch was actually to start with something really just focused on the new file starting point. The hunch being is I knew that we weren't going to be the only team thinking about first draft related features to get you to get started. Figma design will need this. FigJam will need this. Figma slides will need this. So I think as much as I was really thinking about what is needed for this launch and what is needed for Figma entirely as an ecosystem of AI stuff, it's like someone is going to have to think about a pretty interoperable AI system cross-product. So I don't want the engineers to build out something that is like a whole creation experience built on like Command K for FigJam or built on a completely new menu or built in completely ingrained one-to-one into the template system until we have more validation that one, this is something people will use. Two, something that actually helps solve that. We still had to do a lot of technical validation at this point, right? Like our engineers were just doing so much diligent work in just prototyping everything and in doing evals on work. There was just so many moving pieces that my design point of view feels like if we really care about blank canvas, let's maybe start there. Let's just start with the new file and not have to think about building such a foundational system yet until we mature the idea, until we go through more iterations where we get more user feedback, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where I wanted to start first. And we already had something similar at the time called placeholders and where we had template placeholders. So we would just be like reusing that essentially. So that's where I was standing at that moment. I think it was just good because I think at this point, Jordan Singer came in and he was also onboarding to a lot of the context and what FigJam needs. It was good to showcase to him, here's some stakes in the ground for where we think FigJam could be. And it helped him think about how to think about the overall AI system in general for each product, which is like such a nebulous task in general. So I think the breadth here was like very important just to kickstart that conversation.
Where did you go next from this? So this was this one round. From this point on, was there any other round of explorations or from this point, you just landed to the final version that is in prod right now?
We went through so many more rounds of explorations, but they began to taper into thinking about two things, the new file state, and maybe if we don't want to completely build out a whole AI system for FigJam just yet, let's think about like an entry point somewhere where people can access the tool in an evergreen way. So we were able to scope out, let me see what it was. Oh, there was like a whole other debate too on whether the entry point needed to be like in the delightful toolbar or somewhere else up here. This just became too long at a certain point. And at that point, let's actually think about something that feels a little bit more anchored to like file level controls, right? So this is everything to do with affecting your whole file, the overall nav we have here, instead of something that's specific to nodes you can add to the board or primitives you can add to the board. So it's not here, but maybe one thing I can do is pivot where we eventually landed, where we did think of a new file state. That's something that's a little bit more ephemeral, but we also anchored it that you can always revisit it up here in the overall nav. So we have an AI entry point here that you can always click into and use. But yeah, that was what we ended up landing with.
I like that you specifically in the text said AI beta. So the expectations for people are also set accordingly. I like that detail.
Yeah.
AI beta tag.
Yes. You'll see that it's everywhere because it is. And I think it's multiple features, AI features within Figma are also in very different beta states, right? So FigJam and Figma slides are like tone dial in the FigJam AI stuff that are all in open beta. So anyone can try to use it versus something like all of the suite of Figma design AI tools, those things are in a closed beta. Mainly just we're still testing a lot of things. A bunch of like evals need to still happen. But I think those are very important. And obviously we worked very closely with our legal counsel and Adam on that team too, just to make sure that we are setting the right expectations here. We're also just making sure to remind users that this was like our first ever, especially for FigJam. At this point, this was genuinely going to be like beyond Jambot, our first ever introduction to thinking about what it means to empower people with new AI tooling and a whiteboarding tool. So it's a very complicated.
How long was this project?
This end to end, I believe, was 3 months, I think, if I'm not wrong. So we started, I think the seed was planted a very long time ago. So like me and my really close engineering collaborator, Michael, we started to think about this May, June, but we didn't finally launch something by November. And I think a lot of that is, and we always say this, how you can get to a prototype really fast and you can wow people with that, which gets a lot of momentum. But the actual work to ship something that's of quality, especially at the bar we have here at Figma, is very hard. So we always joke about how the 90% is easy, the 10% is the last 10%. It's like, it feels like dog years.
So I got to ask you a question. The final version that went to prod, if you just go to that for a sec, you have to show or pitch the final version to Dylan Field at Figma. And I don't know, is it nervous, like just showing him the work? I'm very curious to know.
I think one thing that I've always appreciated about Dylan is that he gives design feedback, right? I think I've been in obviously multiple different types of product reviews where a lot of the CEO feedback is maybe more focused on like the framing or the strategy and all of that stuff. But Dylan's like a designer, right? So he will be like riffing with you and giving you pointers on one thing over another, right? So I think that's always appreciated. You have a sense where it's like, oh, this is like a design crit. Every product review, designers have an expectation. It's also going to be like a design crit.
So I have to ask you, what was that one feedback that Dylan gave you in all these explorations for FigJam AI that you were just like, found it very helpful?
Oh, this is so easy. This is so easy. This is not even just feedback from Dylan. This was like shared feedback from Dylan, Yuki, and like folks who are like my leads, right? So like Jenny and Emily as well, who is like the overall product lead on this thing, is like, initially we wanted to showcase use cases this way. You'd have to click into it and then prompt something yourself, or even prompt up here and you can execute it right away. This felt like just so many clicks to just writing something. So one thing Dylan, Yuki, and all of us wanted to do is to think about these like two-pronged potential use cases where someone who's never used AI before just wants to try it out. How are we going to help them do it in one click? Like, how do we want to just help them see what could happen here? And then 2, when you are building a more habitual workflow over it, how do we still want to get out of your way for it? So this is why we introduced 2 states to this overall modal. If you've never tried this tool before, you see the screen. And the screen is essentially, these are one-click prompt generations, right? We really lean into preset prompt examples so that when you click it, you see it stream in right away. You know what's happening. And this rotates depending on what use cases we have available and like all of that stuff. All of that was very important to get people to try it out. And one thing, let me actually, if you're still seeing my screen, and then one of the most recent changes we made is that once you've used it for the first time, you don't see that screen anymore. You see something that looks like this. So at this point, there's no benefit to a preset prompt because those preset prompts can feel stale. They can feel less useful. They don't really capture your bespoke need, your specific need. So at this point, we just really want to help guide you to actually building out your prompt, which is why we have really great prompt suggestions in there. You can like maybe specify you want a timeline. You can specify a timeline for whatever, right? Like a project. You can see more prompts and explore prompts here. There's just so many things more, but this is really built to get you into just typing what you want right away. As opposed to prior, this is the only screen that you see. So it's just constantly just, oh, I didn't know that I could generate my own prompt. I thought I could only have to choose between a set of 3. I went through a lot of iteration, but it was really anchored on feedback that Dylan, Yuki, Jenny, and Emily gave around 1, how do we make it easy for new people to start and test it out with presets? And 2, once you actually get into a habitual flow, how do we want to empower you to write your own very specific use case? So ended up being how we thought about this whole thing. I think maybe that's encaptured. Yeah, so here, this is like the old, very old first version of what we currently see on prod, just like a cleaner one. Went through multiple iterations.
Hey folks, this is Jay. It means the world to me that you watch this video. Let me know in the comments what topics you want me to cover in the future, and I will see you in the next deep dive.